You're listening to The Jack and Seth Show.
Welcome back to The Jack and Seth Show, your one-stop shop for hot takes and handsome boys. Jack, a couple episodes ago, you mentioned that you are using a dumb phone now instead of a smartphone. And I just wanted to catch all of the listeners up on the drama of having a dumb phone. Are you still using it? What's going on?
Very topical for this episode, Seth. And you will never pass up a chance to expose me. But no, I've gone back to the dark side. I'm using my crypto smartphone. It's a real thing. Ask me about it sometime. But I've picked up the brick. You familiar with the brick, Seth?
Yes, I've heard of the brick.
I got the brick. I bricked my phone. My phone's a brick, and it works okay. But I'm not gonna lie, I do miss the flip phone. A friend sent me. The New York Times did a big piece about dumb phone users, and they didn't reach out to me, nor did they feature the Cat S22, the Ferrari of flip phones. I felt very unrepresented. The New York Times does not speak for me. But anyways, all this is a way of saying, Seth, I'm no longer using the flip phone, but I still think that interrogating the way we use tech is one of the most important things that sort of modern people need to do. And the person that we're intending to speak about today has done just that, hasn't he, Seth?
Yes, we are super pumped for this episode, Jack, because we have a special guest who you know personally, and we are very excited to introduce to our listeners. Jack, who is on the podcast today?
Yeah, we're very excited to welcome Nancy Walecki, associate editor at a little place called The Atlantic. She has been there for a couple of years. Fantastic writer, wrote a piece a while ago about her dad's music store.
Yeah, guitars and a plethora of different musical instruments. But yeah, mostly guitars.
But even more foundational to her identity than that is that she is a huge fan of the Jack and Seth Show. And so we're very excited to have her on. Nancy, thank you so much for joining us.
No, it's so good to be here. It really goes like follower of Jesus and then number 2 follower of the Jack and Seth Show. So good to be here.
Yeah,
we are the Christian influencers that you listen to about Christian influencers.
Exactly. That's going to be my next piece.
No Christian influencers are above critique except for these two. But Nancy, you just put a piece out. It's actually in the print magazine, which we know is no small feat. It's very prestigious, so congratulations. And it's about John Mark Comer, the pastor, author, all of the above. And it's a great fit for the Jack and Seth Show because we have been talking about Christian influencers for a long time, and JMC is the Christian de-influencer. So we're very excited to dive into with you this piece and the whole process of putting it together.
Yay! Excited to be here and to talk.
Seth, you're a big John Mark Comer fan, right?
Yeah, John Mark Comer was pretty foundational for my faith back in college in particular. And it sounds like, Nancy, also for you in some ways. So what I'm actually really interested in is your process of this article. Like, where did it start? What piqued your interest in JMC? What's your kind of personal journey with John Mark Comer? And how did you get to this point of writing this article?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, I feel like I was well suited to write about him and that I was actually really shockingly new to the JMC phenomenon. Like, truly, as I was reporting the piece was as I figured out the depth to which he actually is really popular and really influential with people. So I had been hearing about John Mark Comer from friends and honestly probably from people in Bible study and for a while, but hadn't realized that they were all talking about the same guy. So like I had a friend who would take a Sabbath. I had two friends that started fasting, and they would talk about like, I read this book or I heard this podcast or blah, blah, blah. But I just didn't figure out that kind of all roads led to John Mark Comer. And then I read The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry this summer and then realized, okay, they've actually all been reading this one guy. So it was really out of my own curiosity about him that I started reporting, and own curiosity about why so many of my friends were interested in him and why he was resonating. And so I was like going on that journey in real time as I reported the piece. Like I thought it might be interesting to talk to him and do a piece about him. And then it very quickly became I'm doing a profile. And then it became my Christian friends being very excited about that I was getting to talk to John Mark Comer because they were big fans. But I think also I grew up in a non-denominational, both somehow non-denominational and Catholic background in Southern California. And so many of my friends were and are secular. Like I'm not in Christian culture in the same way that I think some people are. And so again, I just missed the JMC thing and then got into it through the piece.
Okay, so then maybe to piggyback on that, if you're speaking to your secular friends or a secular audience as you do, why is John Mark Comer important? The three of us know who he is. He's written some books that people in the Christian world care about, and he's an anti-phone, you should do spiritual disciplines kind of guy. But what's your sort of broader sense of why he's significant or interesting to just a general audience?
Yeah, and that was something that I was really having to think about and calibrate as I was writing the piece. But I think one thing that I kept thinking about as I was working on it was like, he is somebody who is trying to offer a spiritual prescription for America's hurry problem and just general overwhelm. And so I think he appeals to a broad, or he can be interesting to a broad audience because he's calling out what everybody knows and that there is just something that's wrong and not quite right about how our lives are set up between sort of phones, rushing between things, and also just not even busyness, but literally living with this gnawing sense of hurry, even when you don't have someplace to be. And so I think he speaks into that. And so because I think the felt need is strong enough, there's an appeal just in the sense of we hear a lot about these different self-help books. We hear a lot about different kind of secular solutions to the problem, but this guy is very explicitly making a spiritual claim. So I think even just for kind of the curious reader, the idea is interesting of, oh, wait, what could a Christian solution to this look like? And I think also the idea that maybe some aspects of modern life could be improved by living literally more like Jesus is just like an animating idea for anybody, even if they don't agree.
Yeah, you take us on this journey throughout the piece, right? Because you start in a church where you're hearing Comer speak, and then you go visit his home, and then you actually try to embody the practices yourself. I love that there's almost like a review of his book, but almost like you review a product.
I know. Partway through, I was like, it's like I'm reviewing an exercise regimen, but for your soul, which I guess is what spiritual disciplines are a little bit.
So as you were interviewing him and even talking to friends of yours that really respect and love his work, what differentiates him from these other Christian, like these other wellness influencers or maybe even Christian influencers? We're talking on this podcast a lot about Christian influencers and the world that is. He's like the anti-influencer, it feels like. What's your read on what differentiates him in this space?
Yeah, what differentiates him from other Christian influencers? That's a good question. You guys honestly probably have a better read on the whole field than I do, but I would say that one key thing about John Mark Comer is the West Coast of it all. I think a lot of the sort of Christian influencing or Christian media can often come from the Bible Belt, which is neither here nor there. But I just think with John Mark Comer, he's maybe speaking to a slightly different group of people that I would argue are beginning to resemble more and more Americans, which is people that live in these sort of secular environments that may not have a great sense of what, or they're not around a lot of people that live the same way they do. And so I think maybe he's tapping into he's articulating things in a slightly different way than I think the typical Christian influencer or author would, just because of kind of the circumstances that he's coming from. But then at the same time, he's essentially trying as little as possible to go viral. There's a certain degree to which, right, you're going to use your social media to promote your book or whatnot. But if you look at his pages, it's actually pretty funny. They're essentially all just like beige slides with quotes. And like my mother uses Instagram and she follows him and will just skip his videos because she finds them boring. But she likes his books and stuff. But it's just he's not trying to play the game, I think, in the same way, even though he's extraordinarily popular and obviously understands how to be popular and how to market. Like his stuff is very well packaged, very millennial gray. But I think also he sees himself, and he told me this when I was interviewing him, he sees his role with social media a little bit differently, which is he compared himself to the street preacher that stands in front of the Old West Saloon, like preaching about the ills of what's going on. And you go there, you say what you need to say, and then you leave. So I think he also is pretty aware of his own relationship with technology in that way.
Yeah, I think to the sort of him existing in this middle space between extremes in Christianity, there's a good line in the piece that he has conservative theological positions, but a lot of people assume he's a tote bag carrying liberal, NPR liberal, which I was like, that's why Seth loves him. Seth, you love a good tote bag, don't you?
Jack, stop exposing my many tote bags that are hanging around our house that we have nothing to do with.
Anyways.
No, it's so funny. No, and people will assume that about him. There's a Substack that I came across that was like, why Christian nationalists need their own John Mark Comer, or like why the right needs its own John Mark Comer. And it's honestly, if you were to lay his beliefs out, like they probably match like to some extent, but he's not super political.
That's actually one area that, as we've been looking at the world of Christian influencers, there's just this kind of interesting intersection between Christianity and politics within the internet space. It seems like he transcends that in many ways, but also I can't tell if it's like avoidance or if it's just like something else. But like, what's your read on that?
I know that's something that I thought a lot about as we were interviewing and as I wrote the piece. And where I came with it is I think genuinely he does not feel like that is his place. Like I think he sees himself as, if there was something going on in the church writ large, capital C, that he disagreed with or felt called to speak into, I think he would. But I think he just genuinely does not see that as his area. Like I think he just sees, like, every generation has somebody to some extent like John Mark Comer who's trying to point people back to early church history. And I think that's really just the role he sees. And I would imagine, I'm just speculating here, we didn't talk about this, but I would also imagine that coming from both growing up in Silicon Valley and then leading a mega church in Portland, Oregon, you just have an understanding of kind of how to calibrate your message. And there are parts of Christianity that are hard to swallow, and people are waiting for you to lead with that, or they're just waiting for you to get to that. And I think he wants people to he wants people to hear the other stuff first, the sort of love God, love others. But the political stuff is a great way to go quickly viral on social media if you're like screaming about something.
Totally. And I do really appreciate that about him. And I think that's maybe the challenge of this piece too, is he's not exactly like the manosphere or like an Andrew Huberman kind of wellness influencer or something. He's his own thing entirely, where as a fellow journalist, it's, if he was a right-wing shill, it's like, okay, there's your angle. But
I know
when he's just a guy being like, you should observe the ancient Christian traditions, it's what do you make of this?
I know. And it's tough writing about that for a secular audience too, because you're like, for a Christian, it's, oh, interesting, let's get into the history of evangelicalism and blah, blah, blah. Like, you're not going to be, yeah.
Yeah. But let me lay my cards on the table of my...
That's John Mark Comer's thing. He always says that. Did you know that? In every book? Yes, if you go to the footnotes, this is so nerdy, but if you go to the footnotes, so like he'll say, not everybody has an hour to spend praying every morning or something, but do what you can, do 5 minutes. It'll be like footnote. Go to the footnote. He'll say, to lay my cards out on the table, I actually think that everybody does have an hour because you, like, on average, spend X amount of hours on your phone each day. And anyway, so you've spent some time.
You'll be shocked to hear that I have not been spending time in the footnotes of John Mark Comer's books.
Yeah, totally. Just like these idioms do, they just exist.
That's so funny. Look at me go. I guess I'm the tote bag liberal. My question, or like my inner skeptic when I look at John Mark Comer, is a little bit like, look, he's written all this stuff about how the kind of new paradigm of being on your phone and the creator economy and influencers and all this stuff is bad for your soul. But he is himself basically an influencer in the sense that he was a mega church pastor. He's now, to my understanding, like not a every week pastor of a church. Is that right?
He has a small house church that he does each week.
Yes, that's right.
And then he's on the teaching staff of a church in LA. But yeah, he's not leading his own big church anymore.
Yeah. And all of us maybe have encountered him through the internet some way or another. I guess you said, Nancy, that your friends had told you about him, but I think he still does have a podcast and like a large internet presence. So part of me is just curious or skeptical. Is he really as anti-influencer as he claims, or is he, I don't know, and can you use the algorithms to speak against the algorithms? I don't know. Did you think through this as you were working on the piece as well?
Yes, I definitely did. And we talked about that. And it is such an interesting tension. I think if he were to be here, he would probably say he doesn't believe that all digital technology is bad. So, for instance, the church he runs at his house, what they do is he sends out essentially a podcast of his sermon before church. Everybody listens to it. And then the actual church is they have a meal together, they pray together, they talk about whatever the sermon or reading was. And because he thinks that there's something to be said for using the good part of technology, which can be right. You can hear the preaching and then you can go to a place and discuss it. So that he's not against all of it, but he's looking for kind of a reconfiguring of it. But yeah, I didn't resolve that tension for myself about being an influencer while saying you shouldn't be relying on this stuff. Also, at the same time, I do keep coming back to evangelicals and pastors have always been influencers. It's like Billy Graham was. So, and not that it's totally the same thing, but I think as a Christian, there are probably ways that you can be using these platforms to spread what is the truth, I would think. But again, it is totally a tension. And I think there's also a knee-jerk reaction that people have to John Mark Comer that I definitely had, which is where they see the guy in the monochromatic shacket and pants that are like sustainably made, and he looks very polished, and he has the bestsellers in the airport. And you know, there are a lot of people that have been burned by pastors like that. And so there's skepticism that I came in with. But as I read more of his stuff, I do think that he is just trying to point people to the fundamentals, even though there's like a lot of packaging and branding. I know it doesn't quite answer the question because I never quite answered the question for myself, honestly, but it's certainly a tension of his. Though I would say he's a little bit less like and subscribe than a lot of the influencers.
Well, yeah, because if you're him, you could turbocharge your growth if you just turn on the outrage machine or something, like to give him his flowers a little bit. Like, he has made a good career for himself as like a writer, and obviously if he wasn't, we wouldn't even be talking about him. So it's an impossible question to answer, right? Of could he avoid the algorithms altogether? But I do think his even with the politics thing, right? He shows some restraint in an admirable way. And even giving up a mega church, right? That's got to be a difficult thing for your ego.
No, totally. And I think he did say he considers deleting social media and is trying to get off of social media. So there is definitely some thinking around it. One thing that I came across, because as I was trying to answer this question for myself in reporting, is this is such a silly thing, but his follower count compared to other Christian influencers is extremely low. He has a lot. It's like 250,000 or something. But if you compare him to, say, Mark Driscoll or somebody like that who does more sort of culture wars stuff, there's quite a numerical difference.
Yeah, Forrest Frank is blowing him out of the water as far as followers.
So true. Yeah. Oh, I got to listen to the Forrest Frank episode, you guys. I saw that it dropped. Or did I imagine that?
That was like a month ago. What have you been doing?
Okay, but I'm still favoring Girls Gone Bible. I'm still like contemplating everything I learned through that podcast episode.
No, that's right. We intend these episodes to simmer. That's why we take so long to release them. It's because you need to really process it. I did want to ask, something that you gesture at the end of the piece that I think is a big piece of the Comer question for me is that all three of us being Zoomers, it does feel like people around our age right now, and maybe more broadly, are at a real moment of like spiritual interest and feel a real kind of spiritual malaise. I've noticed this just in my own life the past couple of years. I've been a religious person my whole life, but a lot more people are more interested in hearing about my faith, coming to church, exploring Christianity because they feel that life is empty and the things that they're told they should be wanting are ultimately not fulfilling.
Mm.
And so, I don't know, when you look at John Mark Comer and practicing the way and these disciplines, do you think that is an answer for young people who feel lost, disillusioned, and spiritually confused or whatever?
That's such a good question. And I think this is just sort of me speculating, but I think it really depends on where you are in your faith journey. I think there's elements of John Mark Comer's messages that are great for people who have never heard of Jesus before, or just have this vague sense, like we talked about earlier, something is wrong. And so I think he can be good in that way. Like the ruthless elimination of hurry, for instance, he told me, a book about discipleship to Jesus disguised as a self-help book. So there's elements of, because he identifies felt needs, that he's accessible. But I do think that the way I have seen him the most useful in the lives of people, because one thing that was not in the piece was I did a lot of interviews with people who read and loved Comer and follow his work. And one thing that a lot of them shared is that they actually were Christian in some form. They had already made that mental assent to, I believe in God, I'm following Jesus. Or rather, actually, they'd made the mental assent to, I believe in God. But then there's this question of what next. It's especially if you grow up in evangelical churches, there's this big focus on saving people. You get saved, and then I'm saved, now what? And I think John Mark Comer can be helpful in that sense because he does give you a roadmap to some extent. But you have to, at the same time, you have to be able to hold in both hands. This is a helpful roadmap with tools. And you also have to hold in the other hand, God loves me, right? And there's not, this doing the practices is not going to increase or decrease that. The only thing that I think it can do, and that I was seeing it, or one of the things that I was seeing it do for people, is that it increases their love of God, right? And when you love God more, the theory goes, it's easier to love others. So I think it's really keeping sight of this is a way to deepen your faith versus this is the way to follow Jesus. And if you're not doing these 9 habits of highly successful or highly effective Christians, you're missing the mark, I think that's the key part. But I do think that also I see it in part as a reaction to some of the, I think our generation some of us did grow up in the maybe more non-denom, not much structure type churches. And I think John Mark Comer can provide some clarity for those people that, again, maybe just feel like they've plateaued a bit. And that way it really is like an exercise regimen. But
The word I think about too is depth, where I've been on my own journey with my relationship to my smartphone recently. And I think that the biggest thing that screen addiction takes from you is like a feeling of depth in your life. Like you just live this very shallow surface level existence. And so when I read your piece and it's like I was sitting next to my fire escape for an hour reading in the morning, or I started interacting with homeless people and like giving food to them. Those are things that I think make your life feel deeper and more lived in. And this world where we're captive to the algorithms and sort of unable to focus on anything for more than a couple of minutes, it makes things feel incredibly shallow. And so I think in that sense, a lot of people around our age would really benefit from practicing the way.
Oh, totally. You don't even have to be Christian. And that's funny because that is one of the critiques often is like, this advice could be helpful to a lot of people. But this advice could be helpful to a lot of people. And I think when you start to live a deeper life like that or slow down, you do find your mind wandering toward more transcendent things, or just thinking about other people more. It's actually alarming how little I thought about other people. So these types of things are good, useful tools.
It's almost like the person of Jesus. It's like he was onto something with his the way
I
that he
know.
lived. And
I know. It's almost like he was the greatest person ever.
then
Man
John Mark
person,
Comer was
God
maybe
person.
second as the greatest person ever. No.
No, Jack and Seth.
Oh,
And Seth, yeah.
so Nancy, final question from me at least. If you were to make a tier list of Christian Avengers, would John Mark Comer be in your Christian Avenger list?
Oh my gosh, this is such a good question. This is also so funny because this requires me to know like multiple types, like multiple Christians. And like, again, we're really just out here fighting for our
Well,
lives with
no.
like
Seth, he
Christian
hasn't
culture.
appeared on the Logan Paul podcast yet, so he can't be a
Right.
Christian Avenger.
No intersection
Well,
there.
you know what's interesting? I will answer this question, but one thing that is interesting to me is I feel like there's a set of Christian Avengers that are happening where it's like the West Coast, like
Wow.
the West Coast Christian Avengers. There's Tyler Staton, Tim Mackey, Andy Crouch. They're in their own. I don't want to say clique, but like they're in their own sphere, and they're like a network of people that are all kind of thinking about similar things and approaching it all similarly. But anyway, is he on my Christian Avengers?
What are sorry to cut you off.
Sure.
What are the DC, I don't know movies, but what's like the DC version of the Avengers?
Oh, the Justice League. Yeah.
Okay,
This
so
is
that's
it.
the
Yeah.
Christian, John Mark Comer's in the Christian Justice League.
No, that's so true.
We've
That's so
established
true.
new.
That's actually, I'm gonna leave journalism and write feature films, and that's gonna be it.
Like still big, but maybe a little bit less as known.
I wanted to ask as well, Nancy. I know writing for the Atlantic print is like a big deal, and just it's a whole thing. It's a whole thing, a long process, I'm sure. And so, how are you left feeling about this piece or about John Mark Comer? We're recording this before it is released into the world, so it's an interesting liminal space. But
Yes.
yeah, I don't know. Where did this leave you? I'm curious to know.
I am going to retain the practices. I actually have found them helpful. I don't know if I'm going to fast every week. I really just never quite got there with that. Maybe that's the point. But I guess I am nervous for it to come out. We are in this liminal space, and it's as soon as it comes out, everybody will have thoughts beyond just you two. And I will be hearing from people who have thoughts. But I'm really interested to see how people react, because there are elements of the piece, right, where I am making it legible or I'm wanting to write in a way that makes John Mark Comer's appeal clear and interesting for people who aren't Christian. There's a version of this article that got really deep into theology and history, and this is more just looking at, is he just a wellness influencer, which felt like kind of the main question that our readers would have. But I also, in looking back at the piece, realized that I actually did write relatively frankly about my own experience with them, my own sort of relationship with God, and I'll be curious to see how readers receive it. It didn't seem like much at the time, but now that it actually is going to be in print, it'll be interesting to have that in the world. But I feel fine about it. And I guess it's a Christian podcast, so I can say too, like, I prayed so much about it. Our Bible study prayed so much about it. Like, it's out there now, or it will be. But what am I going to take away? I think it's neat that of all the things that could have been a print piece, it's this piece about a pastor that like really just occurred to me on a total whim, and through a series of coincidences was made possible. So there's that.
To put my cards on the table, my third set of cards
Yeah.
on the table this
Jack.
episode. I think it's a lovely piece, and I think as someone who's been a long time subscriber to the Atlantic, I remember it's few and far between when you get Christianity represented charitably at length in the magazine. They have a variety of perspectives, and College Jack, if he was getting his print Atlantic and opened this, would be like, no way, heck yeah.
I wanted to also say that I really enjoyed the piece. Specifically, I loved your kind of digging into your own experience with the habits. And I feel like
Yeah.
it could be a win if somebody reads this and they say, I want to try one of those things.
Yeah, no, that's so true. Yeah, also you can thank my editor for steering me in that direction, because I used to have just like a ton of different people talking about Comer, and they were like, just focus on how you experienced it. But One thing I will say too, I was talking to a colleague who's Christian about it, and she said too, you never know with these pieces what the purpose of writing it was. Maybe someone just picks up the magazine in a dentist's office and reads an interesting story and thinks, yeah, like you said, like maybe I'll try that, or oh, actually here's somebody. I think it's also important if you're a Christian and a writer too, to write about your faith periodically, not to evangelize, but just so that people can understand that you can be an intelligent person who works at a magazine and believes in God, and not only believes in God, but will do things in your life that maybe seem inconvenient and strange because of those beliefs. That also just seemed important to do.
Nancy, thank you so much for joining. This has been such a fun deep dive for me and hearing all the time you put into this piece. And I'm excited for it to be done, released, and you don't have to think about it anymore. Just kidding. You will be thinking about it.
No, it's my grateful task. It's my grateful task.
I hope that we get to have you on for a future article someday. Maybe about a small podcast making waves in the world of Christian influencers. Just throwing ideas out there.
Oh, you know it. You know it. I can't wait.
Nancy Walecki, live from the Jack and Seth Show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Woo! Thank you for having me.